A lot of you have reached out to me about zone training. Now there's 5 different zones. This is not a new method of training. Zone training has been around for as long as I have, but there are 5 specific zones here. Zone 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If you go online, there's a lot of conflicting evidence, which I think is why a lot of you are so confused. So I brought on an expert, Dr. Charlie Weingroff, a very good friend of mine, to debunk a lot of these issues. We're gonna go through it right now in this really great YouTube video. Let's go. All right, so jumping into the 5 zones of training, I think a lot of this is going to be determined by max heart rate. So starting with zone 1, that's 50 to 60% of your max heart rate. The exertion level is going to be very light. I mean, I'm looking at this as like your typical walk. Zone 2 is going to be 60 to 70% of your max heart rate, light exertion. Now this is a great zone for building basic endurance, fat burning, and it's sustainable for long periods of exercise. I also find that there is a restorative component to zone 1 and zone 2 to where this can be, great for people who have overexerted themselves but want to continue to exercise and recover. Zone 3, now we're getting in that 70 to 80% maximum heart rate range, more of a moderate exertion level. This is going to improve aerobic fitness and muscular strength. Zone 4, this is 80 to 90% of your max heart rate. I would definitely consider this hard from an exertion level standpoint. We're going to be increasing anaerobic threshold and max capacity for shorter efforts. So when I'm seeing, when I'm out on the ice playing ice hockey, or I'm doing, really hard sprints. Now jumping into zone 5, 90 to 100% of max heart rate. This is a max effort. And what I find is that for someone who's in shape, you're not going to be able to immediately hit this out of the gate. This is something that is going to take some intervals. It's going to take those repeats for you to elevate your heart rate into this area. This is for very fit athletes in a very brief duration. This will help develop fast twitch muscle fibers to boost sprint speed, etc. I find that this can actually become a very dangerous zone to bring someone into that's deconditioned. So I would be really careful with assigning zone 5 training to someone that is not used to this. I think also determining the modality you're going to use when trying to get into these zones. I find some type of cyclic repeat, like an Airdyne bike, a very, very great tool to use because it's requiring very low skill, opposed to, say, sprinting, which you better be a good sprinter and make sure that your body's conditioned to be able to hold up to that high level of intensity. So I think also choosing the modality is incredibly important. There are certain modalities that I wouldn't choose because maybe I can't demand as much speed out of that for a shorter period of time, but I might use something like, a step mill, for more zone 2 training. But for more of that zone 4, zone 5, you better make sure that the individual that you're working at is conditioned, and you better make sure that the modality that you're choosing for them or yourself is safe. Even if you're someone that's conditioned, I'm going to assign different zones depending on someone's goals and depending on, their stress levels and, how well they're resting and they're recovering, not only from workouts, but from everyday life. If someone's under an incredible amount of stress, maybe if they're traveling, if they've been drinking alcohol, if they're dehydrated, that's not, in my opinion, a good opportunity for me to have them do, a zone 4, zone 5 training. I might want to get them into more of a recovery state, and doing something that's a little bit slower and a little bit safer, like a zone 2, I think would be the right decision. So now choosing the wearable you're going to use is incredibly important. I mean, there's a lot of great wearables out there, but there's a reason why they still make chest straps and they're also making wristwatches. You're going to find that wearing a wristwatch is going to be very challenging to get an accurate reading when you're doing a very high intensity or very high intensity interval work. So I find that anything over zone 3 for me, if I'm getting into that zone 4, zone 5, I should not be using a wristwatch. I will go to either a MyZone or First Beat or a Polar chest strap monitor. It's going to be much more accurate. There's a reason why they're making both wristwatches and chest straps. Chest straps are recommended more for your higher intensity. I would say, to be safe, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5. And I think if you're in that zone 2, 1, 2, and 3, obviously 3, there's some carryover. You're going to have no problem throwing on your Apple Watch or your Garmin, and I think that's going to give you a really accurate reading. But if that intensity is getting really high and if you're noticing that the readings are becoming a little bit inconsistent, then move to that chest strap. And for the rest of it, check out Charlie Weingroff. He's going to really give you his perspective on zone training. He discloses some really cool information. And I would recommend you guys not only watching this once, but giving it a repeat, because I think this information that you're going to get, you're going to be able to carry this throughout life, and hopefully many healthy and happy years of training. Let's get rocking. So guys, so everyone, I'm here with Dr. Charlie Weingroff, one of my closest buddies. I mean, I married him and his beautiful wife, Allie, but Charlie's one of the most sought after professionals worldwide in PT and athletic performance. Um, I think, I'm going to blow smoke right now, but if there's the Tiger Woods of physical therapy, I put Charlie up there. And Charlie's been someone I've respected for years, and I've worked with for years. And I'll be the one to say this: I've very rarely, from a PT standpoint, seen him wrong. So it's
No, no, I can be very wrong, but I'm stuck on. I want to hear about this Tiger Woods experiences. That sounds interesting to me.
I love it. So listen, brother. So when I naturally, a lot of different people are coming at me with questions, and typically when there's a lot of gray area, I don't like to. I very rarely like to give definitive answers, right? It's always a maybe, or like, let's look into it, or it depends. But when we get into this topic of zone training, and I think now Apple, because of Apple Watch and because of a lot of the tech that's out there, this is something that's been around for a very long time, that people now are starting to hear about it more and more. So they're curious. And you have your 5 zones, and we could talk about percentages of each zone. But would you do me a favor, out of the gate right now? Could you just define in simplest terms, what is zone training about? What is it for somebody who's never heard of it?
Well, the first thing that's actually very, very warranted for confusion is that if somebody looks up zone training, or even let's say they're because I've seen this, you're in a big commercial gym, and up on the wall it has like zones.
Right.
If you look up, you have to be very precise in what you're looking at, because most of the time you're looking at something that is very, very cultural in the cycling world, and they have the exact same words of zone one, zone two, zone three, zone four, and it is completely different than what has been, for lack of a better term, pop culture over the last several years. And when I say pop culture, it's not because this is bogus or not highly scientific. Um, the to get it right from the horse's mouth, where I would suggest the individual who researched what I think you're asking about, in the zone training, is Dr. Inigo San Milan. Okay, this is the researcher that has created different zones that unfortunately are the same words as what's used in cycling. So it's very, very confusing if you don't know exactly what you're looking at. All right. So I'm not even sure if he's a PhD or not, but he probably is. But I call he won't mind that somebody called him doctor. The zones are without question very similar to what you see in the cycling, where zone one would be less intense, two, three, four, five would be the most intense. So that's the same in both. The standard of what zone training is using, and I want to make sure that, because I'm going to try and use an analogy that has nothing to do with physiology. I think sometimes people understand that, because the moment you start to use scientific words, sometimes people tune out, and like, so I get yelled at a lot for using big words. I'm not going to do it. But there's basically this, we must have this understanding that in the training process, particularly with conditioning and everything that we would want from conditioning, both getting healthy and performance goals like losing body fat or endurance training, it's not free. That is one of the most important things to understand of all training. If we're going to say, oh, just work hard and good things happen, that's really very unfortunate. Now, I think you and I know what we mean. And most people, of course, you have to work hard, but it's not like automatically these things happen, because then you start to think, well, if you work harder, then more good things will happen.
Right.
And that's even less true, because there's a price to pay. So I'm going to use the analogy of buying a house, where the house is everything that you want from fitness. So the shelter from the room to live comfortably. That's the analogy for getting fit, for losing body fat, looking good in the mirror, scale going down. That's what you want. And it's very, very normal to get a big house. Some people get a small house. Some people get a small house in a very expensive neighborhood. There's all different versions of house that you can get, just like there's all different versions of things that you could target your training to achieve.
Right.
They're probably all very valuable. They all do the same thing. They just like a car gets you from A to B, but they all are going to have a different profile in what you have to pay. Whereas you use money to buy a house, we have to use biology. So I am going to use that word. We're not going to get scared of the word biology. The currency that we have to use comes from inside our body. So going back to buying a house, sometimes you can just you have enough money in your bank account, you just buy the house outright. A lot of times we have to get a mortgage, and you still get the house and you still own the house, but now you have debt. And that is a very normal process if we use that in the training world, where you will get what you are training for. If you work hard on doing your intervals on the bike, you'll lose body fat. You will also incur some debt. And that's what you have to recover from. That's why you can't do the same super hard training every day, day after day after day, because it's not free. We're going to get to zones because the way those zones are categorized is by how much debt you are incurring. Debt is not always a bad thing as long as you have it under control. If you didn't even know you were incurring debt, the next thing you know, somebody's going to change the locks on your house that you just bought. So if let's say if you bought a very inexpensive house in an inexpensive neighborhood, you could buy it outright and you have very, very little debt. That's zone one training. You don't get as much as you would get from zone five or zone four or zone three, but you have no debt. If you were going to do zone five training, which would be the most intense in Inigo San Milan's categorization, then for one workout, you would likely be achieving, or at least being on your way to achieving the biggest, baddest house that you could ever imagine. But you're going to have to take a big mortgage to get that.
Hmm.
So part of
Actually very good. I've never heard that. It's a very good analogy.
it's almost like I've been thinking about it, right? The so the interest that you pay on the debt of the more intense training. This goes for everything in training. Nothing is free. Again, I will stand on my head and not feel very comfortable about it. Just work hard and good things will happen. That's really, really unfortunate, especially again because it leads to, oh, just work harder and more good. That is so unfortunate that people think that. So now the analogy for the interest that you're paying on the debt is the categorization that Inigo San Milan uses. As the zones change, there is one, not two, but one thing that's measured, and that is one of the byproducts that the body will build as a cost to more intense training. All right. So now I've set the stage, and now I'm allowed to use a big word. It doesn't matter what it is because it's a very good thing. We said debt isn't always a bad thing. But as you train harder over a longer period of time, your body will build something called lactate. And lactate is a very, very good thing. There's nothing bad about lactate. And in fact, as long as you stay in lower to medium to lower intensities, you can use the lactate to create more energy. The moment you start to get into the more intense training, then lactate is not useful for you anymore. And what also comes along with the lactate is kind of like what shuts down your muscle strength. That's the when your muscles start to burn or your legs start to feel like waterlogged. That's not lactate, but it's other stuff that comes with lactate. I'm only going to focus on that word because that's what measures the differences between the different zones. Normal amounts of lactate, which would keep you into a very low intensity of training, is around 1.7 to 1.9 millimoles. Okay, that's just the scientific measurement of if you did measure someone's blood looking for lactate. Anything above that, you have now probably exceeded everybody's favorite zone two. Now, the research would show that when you have certain amounts of lactate, zone one, these are the things that happen. You get a small house in a small neighborhood. Zone two, which is very, very well known, and it's probably popular for a number of reasons that maybe we can get to, but you have a very, very good return on your mortgage. You got a low interest rate. So you can get what the zone two is going to deliver and not have to pay a ton. Now, you're not going to get that big bad house in overlooking Central Park, but you will get lots of good things that typically can only happen when you train with lower intensities. I think that's why zone two or this type of training has gained popularity because as you and I know, being in the profession for many, many years, things kind of go like in cycles. Like it goes from this, and then we realize that wasn't really the answer. But instead of just doing this, it goes like that right away. So there's times in more recent times that, oh, we have to be intense, we have to be a badass, we have to do the type of training that these outlier superstars are doing. So low intensity was, kind of got poo-pooed. When in fact, there were certain things like building mitochondria, which is a significant marker for longevity, health, and performance, are very, very cheap when you stay in zone two. Now,
Now, when you
remember,
say cheap, I just want to be clear. When you say cheap, you just mean it's easy. It's something
yeah,
that's, I just want to be clear because
it's not free. It's not free. Whereas if I want big muscles, I would say that's expensive and it's a long process. Obviously, everything's a long process. It's not like you do one thing. But if I don't incur a lot of debt, I can buy other things. And zone two is cheap because you don't incur a lot of debt, but you get good things.
Right.
So those good things are very, very significant for longevity. They're very, very significant for work capacity. It's a very, very good way to train. We keep the highs high and we keep the lows low. Now, it's when you're in that middle where you're likely paying a lot, but only getting a middle down.
Right.
So we should, whatever your intent of training should always be what you get. I think sometimes when there's a complete disregard for things that are science, and sometimes I don't want to hear about it, just tell me what to do. We'll put a significant amount of effort, but we're not getting the same. You're not getting nothing, but
Right.
you're not getting the same. And that leads to an ideas that we'll typically see where because you don't think you're working that hard and you're not, but you're working too hard, but not that hard. I don't need to recover as much. And that's when either the best thing that happens is you plateau and don't gain the physiological goals that you want, like losing weight or getting stronger. Or this is sometimes when injuries can come out of nowhere for a whole nother cascade of reasons. Okay. Now, getting back to that scary word lactate, it is very possible to measure it at a general population level. There's devices that look kind of like a glucose monitor. Um, I'm not really up to date on if there is anything new in that space, but it's usually around $22 a session for each one to buy the thing. Usually you have to buy a bunch of them. You can't just buy one. And it tells you for whatever workout you chose, what is the amount of lactate that you generated. Now, most of the time, we have a good idea that what zone two particularly is by guessing. But the only way to really know is to do it. And then, because $20, in my opinion, is not worth guessing. So, how do you feel after that workout where you at 1.72 for 30 minutes? That's the intensity. So now you have to kind of remember that intensity.
No,
And
definitely.
then you just do that. You just do zone two and you'll reap the benefits.
But I mean, obviously, most people out there are not going to use, like you described it, as a CGM, right? Like, how are you feeling? I have two questions. How do you feel about where some of the tech is putting us now, like Aura Ring or Apple Watch, when it comes down to stating, well, your max heart rate? Because if it's able to determine your max heart rate, which is really what I question about a lot of these zones, because if you go online, and I did go online and just look at some of the information that was out there, and there's conflicting answers from a lot of different sources. Zone 2 might be in this heart rate range of 120 to 144. Zone 2 might be 120 to 150. Like, that could be a significant difference for most people. I know the difference between 144 and over 150. For me, that's a significant difference for me. Like, I know, like, over 150 is me, like, playing ice hockey, and in the 140 to 144 range is me, doing some steady state cardio in here with a monitor. So I could tell there is a significant difference. But how are you feeling about the tech, especially Apple Watch, on what it's giving most people when it comes to max heart rates?
There's a number of things that you mentioned there, Don. So let me knock them down here.
Sure.
You lined up a number of pins, because the main question about the tech is actually very, very simple. Um, number one, we should make sure that, like, when you go online, the first thing I mentioned, what exactly because I'm telling you, they look exactly the same. They're called Zone 2, Zone 3, Zone 4. And the biking world is based on heart rate. And they're not totally like off the wall, where one is in Alaska and the other one's in South Florida.
Sure.
They're very, very similar.
Sure.
Now, when you do find they're really estimates, extrapolations. So if in the research, if you did where enough people are using a very valid measure of lactate, what are their heart rates? And that's what you're seeing. So it's not all okay. The And again, this is just what's for public usage, which it can be purchased. I don't even know the names of the tech, which is good, but there's far more valid, and that's actually pretty accurate from what I understand. But using other types of measures where you prick the ear or just measure someone's blood while they're performing to see exactly what's in it, and then when that is measured, which can be done very, very quickly, what is that human's heart rate? And that's going to be within the ranges that you're kind of referencing, and that's okay. Now, I would find that the which I do think a lot of other people would find very, very acceptable, is, can you pass the talk test? And the talk test is like, you and I can have the exact same conversation. Our listeners would probably recognize that we had just done something. So it would kind of be like this. So I can still talk in complete sentences. I can still use my hands and not really not really stagger too much, but that I'm a little bit gassed, a touch
Gotcha.
gassed. But you can still talk in complete sentences. You could still take a business call and not be embarrassed or unprofessional. Maybe what I did was a little bit past that. As long as you're in that category, you're probably in zone 2 for most people. One of the concerns of only using heart rate is, unfortunately, for people that need a lot of zone 2. Unfortunately, the people that are cardiovascular, not in great shape, because they'll do something at the correct intensity, meaning it's more than going for a walk, but they're not bringing the heat. Like, they're not really getting after it. Their heart rate will be generally higher for that lower level of activity, just based on their starting point. And they would probably have to do something even less intense to properly be in zone 2. And that's not to rag on anybody, but it's also a little bit of why there's confusion when you only use heart rate. Because if someone's resting heart rate is higher, or their heart rate gets too high and they're out of that range of, I don't want to say normal, because these people aren't abnormal. They just have a different entry point than someone else. And they might be doing middle zone 3 next to someone else who's more fit than they are at the moment, because that other person will get there. And they're doing the exact same speed on the treadmill, neither of which is identifying as particularly hard, but one is pushing lots of lactate while the other one is not. And that's a different house. They're buying a different house. They have a different debt. They have a different mortgage. They're not in. They're not It's not like one is bad and one is good, or it's not like one is garbage and the other one is the best thing ever. It's not zone two.
Hmm.
And then that begs the question: well, is it a big deal between zone three and zone two? That's for other people to decide. They are categorically different, but I don't find zone three is useless. And then, just like with anything, when zone two gets popular, hey, you should also be doing zone five. You should also be doing a little zone four, and because they're all important.
Right.
But to use heart rate alone, particularly in that subgroup, you may find that they're not in zone two anymore, and there is a different price that's being paid for a different product. Now, the last piece was as far as the tech. I am not aware that the most popular technologies and wearables have an ability to measure lactate. They can guess and estimate based off of things like heart rate or even the talk test, which wouldn't be a wearable. But you have to measure blood to know how much lactate is in the system.
Right.
So if there is a technology that is telling you how much lactate, that would be okay. I know I can measure this one, and that is valid. And in most situations, this number also would mean this number. That's a little bit of a jump. It's not wrong, it's not bad, but it's not the industry, it's not the gold standard. So I don't know that there's a technology that can use like what Aura would use or what an Apple Watch would use and accurately measure lactate, aka zone two, three, four.
Right. I'm curious to see what the difference is for if you were to go in and you were to do that lactate test and a heart rate test, right? That's how you're basically saying you're going to find that information out with, like, because again, these are ranges, right? What do we know? Is it that far off, or is it close enough to where you'd say, and
Yeah,
not to the athlete, but the general pop, you know what, this is going to get you like 90% of the way there. Like,
I
go.
think it would. I think it would. As you know, I'm speaking what I think is very, very objectively. Now I'm going to give you my opinion. It's probably in range. It's probably in range. I would probably not, as you know, I would not be favorable to a technology that claims something that is scientifically not accurate. In this case, it's a jump and it's probably going to be accurate. Good news. Just use the talk test and don't worry about your heart rate. And can you speak in complete sentences? Can you hold a phone call? And you are probably that is probably the best metric because that's also a jump. And now you're not beholden to a technology, which I would still support. Either there's a lot of really accurate things that these technologies can deliver, but in this case, I don't think they're any better than the talk test, in my opinion, for understanding a guess of lactate.
All right, and I got a couple more questions. And again, I'm not going to name names. It's not important. I'm more curious on your professional opinion. If you want me to tell you who mentioned this, I will. But there was a recent post where
No, don't mention it. Don't. I don't want to hear any names. I don't want to hear any names.
but someone respected in the space turned around and said some of the takeaways. He wasn't even making claims on what he believed was true or not. He said some of the takeaways from this podcast. One, do roughly 70% of your aerobic work at low intensity, 60 to 82% of max heart rate. So 70% of your aerobic work should be done at a low intensity, which would be 60 to 82% of max heart rate. Two, 20 to 25% of your aerobic work at moderate intensity, which would be 82 to 90% of max heart rate. And then three, only 3 to 6% of your aerobic work at high intensities, which would be 92 plus of the max heart rate. Now, naturally, I know what you'd say. Well, who's this for? We're talking about general pop, right? And training. And I'm not even going to zones now, but someone who's trying to be well-rounded. Do you believe that 3 to 6% of someone's aerobic work should take place at 92 plus percent of max heart rate? Do you feel that's accurate?
um, I'm not ready to say it's accurate. I'm saying that if you take everybody who I think is in this population that you're talking about, and you put them all into a room, and you have them do exactly what you just said, I
Yes.
think most people are going to be okay. Now that is a highly unscientific statement that I'm making, but I'm not mortally offended by that breakdown. I think a lot of people, especially given if they are consistent with that. I'm not going to get into the cliche of consistency is more important than whatever else. The fact is that if they do what you said, I think for a lot of people in that room, then they're all going to be just fine. I'm not sure why they're saying it or what information exists, but it's not offensive, particularly if they would do it. I think I would, even for a general population, if I can keep the numbers straight in my, my whiteboard here in my head, I'd probably have them do more intense things. But in my brain, uh, like if you were to say, I think that first group you said was between 60 and 80%, right?
Yeah, roughly
So
82% of max heart rate, and they're saying 70% of your work should be done in that.
yeah, yeah. So let's just use that as an example. So I'll be up at the 80% end, or even in the second group where it's more than 80%. If I sprint for 10 seconds and my heart rate doesn't even get up that high because it's only 10 seconds, and then I rest for a minute 10, that's a completely different situation
Oh
if
yeah,
I jog for a minute 20. So I would challenge this individual's suggestions that you even know what you're talking about in the first place. And I'm not saying anything bad because the first thing I said was like, this is okay, like this is normal.
sure, sure.
But are we even talking about, because when you have a work to rest situation, you can get a lot different, in my opinion, better work. And now I'm talking to even more people in that room.
Right,
Um, so there's nothing crazy about that. I don't have any idea where it came from. I think they're probably just making it up, and making it up could be they're probably making it up based on their experience and how they have helped people.
right,
That you're allowed to make things up in that regard.
right.
But when you make a statement, well, how are you achieving that heart rate? Because I could do 10 kettlebell swings, which will take me anywhere from 8 to 12 seconds, and then rest. So now my heart rate might get up to like 140 because I'm only doing something. And then if I rest for now, 52 to 48 seconds, my heart rate might get down to 110. So now if I average out where am I at? I'm in the 120s. I'm pretty sure after 10 minutes of 10 kettlebell swings on the minute is going to feel dramatically different, even though I averaged my heart rate of 120, than if I'm on the elliptical behind you and I do 10 minutes at 120, which is going to feel like I barely went for a walk. So
Right.
that's why we have to look at information. There's nothing wrong with what someone is saying. It's terribly incomplete and very misguided.
No, 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 totally understand. And I also think most people in there who are trying to focus on zone training or trying to live at a specific heart rate, and I see it, they might be attacking it at, where does that interval need to be? And I'm almost like, well, it's pretty difficult for me to say, well, 30 seconds. I can't immediately get up to 82% in 30 seconds. So am I now cranking for 20 seconds? And the second I hit 80%, then the clock starts? Right? Like, are you following what I'm saying? And then
Of
are,
course. And that's where
now I've done that much more work already. Like now my interval might be not 30 seconds, maybe it's 50 seconds, but that to me changes the entire work to rest ratio.
yeah. I'm only commenting on the words that you said
Right.
in terms of those would be known as acute variables. So we have time, we have duration, we have volume, how much percentage over, let's say, a week, and we have intensities, the percent of heart rate. These are all part of what are acute variables. There's nothing offensive, and I believe a lot of people, if they do exactly what's suggested in this post, I think they'll have good value there. If I was going to be a little bit more antagonistic, I've done that enough. But I do think it's important that there's never one way to solve everything. And in that case, when you're talking about heart rates, I just gave you an example. That person's heart rate are going to be two totally different things. And one would be probably a very medium to low zone two, and the other one will certainly be zone 3 if you only do 10 minutes. If you did another 10 minutes, you might be peaking into zone 4, and they're both hugely valuable. So remember how you achieve your heart rate and what you're doing, and when you're doing different types of intervals, that changes a lot of the recommendations that are going to help a lot of people.
Right. I mean, I think and I want to close on this last thing. I think there's a lot of confusion out there, right? I think people are hearing about different zones, and it's zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And as Charlie said, 5, there's a cost of doing business. So it's way more than say 1. I think people are confused on where should they be and for how much time. And I think there's so many, there's so many reasons why you'd be in different zones according to this, maybe sport or life or maybe even health history, right? Like maybe it's something where it's too dangerous for someone to try living up near that max heart rate. But so what you're saying is the recommendations that were made, you think it's ballpark, but you still think it's a bit inconclusive. Is there anything you would add? Is there anything you would
Yeah,
add trying to get
I
started?
I would add, I'm not going to necessarily say we could change those parameters because I'm sticking with it. I'm not just saying that to be nice or to. My first response is this is not making me vomit. Um, Remember, one of the very evidence-based metrics for all cause mortality is VO2 max.
Yep.
So that what is the most work you can do where you're primarily using oxygen? That's like you went to every mortgage broker and what's the best rate you can get for the most mortgage? Okay, that's VO2 max. The only way to now you can support some of the backstory to VO2 max by doing some lower intensity stuff. I wonder if somebody really needed VO2 max and they had a long enough runway to judge their training, which is probably a big factor here. Uh, you need to be way more than a few percent of your time in the higher zones because like again it's about being able to say this is what I'm trying to get good at, because somebody could have a cup half full of VO2 max, meaning there's a lot that they can get better at for good reason. But their zone 2 is like they can go forever. So it's not so much that they need to go faster for athletic performance. We know that VO2 max has this it's not even about what it is internally. We know that people that have a higher VO2 max are healthier and live longer, along with other things that muscle mass, all these other things. So the 60 to 70% of your week that you're describing can support VO2 max, but that's not how you're really going to move the dial there. So that's why I insist it doesn't make it wrong. It just means, that that's why I said before, I'd probably put a larger percentage on the very top end, because I think there's two pieces that I would find general population, if even if they hear it once, maybe they'll hear it twice and hear it 10 times. It's the long game. None of these training sessions for a month is really going to do a whole lot to change the metric. Maybe a month actually could for some things if they were really low. But when you look at this stuff long term, you have to pick and choose what you're good at. And you might find that if I gave you like a 3-month trial period, there's probably more efficient ways to learn this, but you would know which zone you should be in. Which one do you perform the least at? Like which one is the hardest for you to do? Man, I really can't do zone 2. I can do zone 1, but I can do zone 3. Well, we probably need to practice zone 2. Now, there's better ways than taking 2 to 3 months. The other thing is, at least in my experience, what is it really like to train hard? I don't think general population knows that. And that's not because they're bad people, and that's not because they're punks and they don't want to bring it. They literally don't know what that actually feels like to not have any reps in reserve, or to go 1 minute on the air bike but you can't go a minute two. Maybe you could do a minute one, but you need that 1 second to get off the bike and fall down. Now, we need to be very judicious and when we apply those strategies. And if we are judicious, you're going to have that big house. So to shy away from this exposition of what it's like to really train hard and train heavy, that shows that you actually understand how the body changes.
Right.
That's when the hard work actually turns over, but you still have to understand the cost of those things. So, if it is a VO2 training session at zone 5, I'm not sure even the most elite of athletes are going to do that more than twice a week or even 3. But to do one, I don't think there's any reason. And good news, if you do a legitimate high-end VO2 training session, there's evidence that would suggest you only have to do it once a month to maintain your VO2. You probably won't get higher. But now, once a month, that's just once every 4 weeks.
What would that look like now? How would you design that? I'm curious in your opinion.
That might be where you could get a lot of all worlds, 80 seconds, full speed. You can't do 82. You're gonna choose a cyclic repeat where
Air dive,
you're gonna
air dive.
but you're also gonna try to maintain, like you're gonna ramp and then keep it there and keep it there and keep it there. And you're gonna know that after 80 seconds, everything's gonna be okay. And you're gonna rest upwards of 5 minutes and then do at least 5 of those. Now, what I don't think is a good idea, like particularly on like the air bike, you get out really big, really big, and now you're working really hard. You're working really hard. So when you get up to like 35 miles per hour, that's the same intensity as you cross the finish line at 22. I don't want that. I'd rather you keep it at 31 or 32. Because you're not trying to do this. You're doing it because you're trying to survive. So if you can keep that even effort at whatever max is, that would be a form of VO2 where you're still in that very high intense, probably for most people, very high zone 4, maybe even zone 5. It probably would be zone 5 when you got good at it, meaning you picked an activity that you could really bring it and feel safe, but know that you're going to get upwards of 5 minutes of rest. Now, that doesn't mean you do nothing. You can coast, you can stretch. You didn't name any names, and I won't name any names, but this is an extremely high level athlete that, or a high level performer, if you will, that would at times have to perform physically for 60 minutes straight. Now, there's some moving around, like they're not just sprinting or fighting for 60 minutes straight. And I believe he knew what 1 minute on the air bike was. I don't think most people even know what that is. They can go for a minute and they can say they're working hard, but I don't think a lot of the general population even knows what it is to push themselves and then not be afraid that they're going to break or be hurt or not catch their breath or things of that nature. And he knew what it was. And I got a phone call from his wife who heard him fall off the air bike at the house. Charlie is, and again, I have to speak slowly so I don't say his name, even though some people may know who I'm talking about. Yeah, he fell off the bike. I'm like, put him on. He's like, all right, you there? He couldn't talk. He's like, hold on. All right, I know what you mean now. Because the most liberal plan that we were going to use for him was 1 minute on, 3 minutes off. And he's like, Charlie, I can't do nothing for 3 minutes. I'm like, yeah, do stretching, do whatever. But if you do this right, you'll know what I mean. And the only reason that his wife was calling was because there was this big plump. So when we talk about zone 5 or lifting heavy, I think that's something that we should intelligently be introducing to people intelligently. Obviously, when people are training on their own, that's a little bit more challenging to be intelligent on what is safe and what's a great idea versus a good idea versus not such a good idea. But that's why I would not be, even though there's high value for the physiological return on zone 5. I want to put you into the situation where you become very literate at training so that you're filling up all the cups,
Right.
and now you have five houses,
Right.
and they're all next. That's the. I'll bring it back to the analogy. Like there is a way to do that, and then it's a little bit more precise. And but we can't. You got to look at all the neighborhoods to make sure you can find the right house.
I freaking love this. Thank you. Can you let everyone know where they can find you on social media, website? I highly recommend check out Charlie. Obviously brilliant.
Yeah, so Charlie Weingroff on Instagram and charlieweingroff.com is a website. I don't know that all the blogs are pulled over from the old website, but everything that you would talk about will you could find a lot of these types of conversations on there.
Charlie and I have been training out. We're trained out of the same facility for a long time. So, maybe one day when he's back out here, we'll do a little video and we'll show you guys what it actually looks like on a cyclic repeat. That'll be fun. I
Explosive cyclic repeat.
love it. Charlie, I love you, man. You're the best.
All right, man. Thank you.
My best. Bye.
Bye bye.